history never bothered to record her given name. All that survives is a title, the Queen of Sheba, a single candle flickering in a corridor of lost scrolls. Yet across blistered dunes and restless seas, she strode so vividly that her silent footsteps still reverberate in hearts starved for meaning. When her caravan groaned into Jerusalem, trumpets froze mid-note, merchants forgot their bargaining cries, and soldiers shifted uneasily on polished spears. A woman, an empress, had crossed a continent. Not for war, not for a husband, but for wisdom. What flame drives a sovereign to abandon the velvet security of her own throne simply to ask questions of another ruler? Curiosity? Diplomacy? Or an ache no crown could soothe? Scripture refuses to fill in the blanks, preserving only a sliver that still crackles with electricity. Centuries later, Jesus himself honored her as proof that a heart desperately willing to seek will inevitably be seen. For every soul that has stared at overflowing tables and still felt starved, her pilgrimage holds a mirror. If you have ever breathed, does anyone notice the storms inside me? Her path made light yours. Sheba baked beneath a sun that scorched stone and spirit alike. Frankincense perfumed the air. Port harbors clanged with bronze bells, merchant ships stitching the Red Sea to distant empires. In this kingdom of opulence lived a girl who rattled tradition like a gust rattles lattice shutters. While playmates practiced demure nods, she perched in smoke-hazed halls, listening to her father spar with philosophers. When priests boasted of gilded idols who swallowed incense, yet never replied, her thin voice pierced the hush. Why bow to mouths of stone that cannot breathe? Her curiosity unsettled the priesthood. But her father, a king of uncommon tenderness, only smiled and urged her to keep asking. Plague or politics no chronicle knows snatched him early. Courtiers rushed a crown onto her untested head. Envoys predicted collapse. Instead, Sheba flowered. Caravans doubled. Borders held. Artisans etched her profile into ivory praising wisdom that belied her years. Still, success could not smother the quiet. Night after night, she lay beneath a canopy of embroidered stars, while another constellation burned beneath her ribs. Who am I when gold turns to dust? When praise scatters like chaff, what endures? Does anyone hear me? The questions would not sleep. One breath-stealing afternoon, a shrewd Judean trader unfurled exotic laces before her dais and spoke of a northern monarch whose greatest treasure was not rubies, but wisdom poured from the Lord. He reads souls the way scribes decode parchment, the merchant whispered, leaning close. A strange tremor fluttered in her chest. A man who could listen as deeply as he spoke. That dusk she stood on the highest terrace salt wind, tangling her ebony braids, moonlight silvering marble cornices, and she whispered 4 words that would redraw maps. Prepare the caravan, I go. No royal edict justified the exodus. Advisors fretted about alliances. Gossip tongues spun clandestine romance. Reality was simpler and sharper. Staying meant spiritual suffocation. So, under a meridian sun, a column of dust and camel bells crawled north. Lapis, ebony, myrrh, and a dog-eared journal inked with questions priests called perilous. Do the gods hear? Why do innocents suffer? How can one separate truth from clever lies? Each dusk, when the caravan pitched circle around crackling fires, she unrolled the journal and scribbled another puzzle. Certain even Scripture's parchment could tear before surrendering real answers. More than once, her chief counselor knelt beside the rug of maps and murmured, "Majesty, your library's grown with wisdom." She traced the North Star and answered without moving her gaze, "I own scrolls of words, but hunger for truth." After that, no one queried her resolve again. Time blurred into infinity sandstorms that painted the sky apricot, cold nights when silence howled through tent seam. Sometimes, beneath a meteor-pierced black vault, she sat alone, palm over her racing heartbeat, asking the desert itself to speak. It did not, but its silence felt somehow honest. A mirror, not a mask. When scorpion stings felled a camel, she walked beside her retinue, dust-caking royal sandals, reminding herself that sovereignty meant very little. When your water skin sloshed, nearly empty. At last, copper dawn reddened a ridge, and scouts cried, "Jerusalem!" Ragged cheers rippled down the line. Sunlight ignited alabaster ramparts. Cedar-framed gates yawned like the mouth of destiny. Drummers thudded. Banners snapped. But the queen's gaze drilled past spectacle toward the cedern doors, guarding the one who might turn questions into rest. She dismounted. Shoulders squared as though shrugging off the weight of miles. Dust whispered from her cloak's hem like shedding an old skin. Inside Solomon's throne hall, cedar beams soaked in myrrh, floor mosaics, glimmering like tide pools. She did not bow. She was a queen. Eyes dark as volcanic glass met eyes deep as twilight. Solomon stood not as overlord greeting subordinate, but as pilgrim greeting pilgrim. Chroniclers could only fit one sentence in their scroll margins. She told him all that was on her heart, and Solomon answered every question. They never captured the raw music of it. She uncoiled queries like silk from a loom. How does a ruler stay onced when corruption is effortless? Why do orphans still beg beneath a supposedly just heaven? Is leadership a crown or a chain? Solomon didn't recite proverbs to impress. He shared stories. Nights when gold tasted like dust. Years when triumph rang hollow. Dawn hours when he feared God's whisper had faded behind palace noise. His vulnerability cracked her armor of wit and pride. They spoke of power's loneliness, of prayers that ricochet off marble roofs, of the thin line between brilliance and blindness. It felt less like debate, more like two shipwreck survivors comparing bruises. Hours melted, lamps flickered low. Eventually, attendants drifted away, swallowed by corridors. On the palace roof, the desert wind traded incense for hint of rain. Stars freckled the sky like scattered diamonds, and conversation slid into hush. In that hush, she sensed presence, a someone shining through Solomon's humility, a breath that knew her before she ever carved her name into seals of silver. The idols of Sheba were mute stone. This presence was heartbeat, intimate, alive. Thunder did not split the firmament, yet the queen shook as though struck by lightning made of quiet. Suddenly, explanations felt small as cinders. She did not need every puzzle solved. She needed an embrace for her questioning soul. And there beneath a sky older than kings, she found it. Not doctrine, but delight. Not formula, but familiarity. She realized the God she had doubted all her life was not aloof, but leant across the rail of eternity to meet her gaze. Tears didn't fall, but anyone passing might have noticed a strange brilliance in her eyes, as if the stars had migrated inward. At sunrise, servants repacked spices and ingots. Courtiers bowed. Trumpets wailed. Few observed what she really carried away. A heart that no longer clawed for explanations, because it had been seen. Solomon watched the desert swallow her silhouette, feeling as though she had stolen a piece of his loneliness in exchange for peace. Scholars speculate that after her departure, he composed the aching lines of Ecclesiastes' wisdom stripped of vanity, and the burning metaphors of Song of Songs, love raw and unmasked. Her candor lanced him too, forcing the monarch to remember. Wisdom without wonder ossifies. Legends in Ethiopia and Yemen murmur she bore home more than frankincense. Perhaps a child, perhaps a dynasty. Historians debate. Poets sing, what towers above genealogies is this? She returned, carrying a faith louder than sermons, yet free of label. Decisions once sharp as Damascus steel now flowed like healing oil. She pardoned a traitor whose children sobbed in the courtyard. She commissioned Sheba's first refuge for widows. She opened granaries during famine, ignoring tariffs. Scribal ledgers noticed revenue dips and muttered, but the people, hundreds of miles away, whispered that justice had awakened. Evenings found the queen in sandalwood gardens, parchment on her lap, pen-dancing lamplight across ink, reflections not for decrees, but for children unborn. She rarely addressed the presence by name. Perhaps she feared desecrating a mystery, but her ink bristled with gentle astonishment. I searched the earth for answers, and found instead a gaze that satisfied my soul. Over seasons, writing became unnecessary. Her deeds replaced pages. She pardoned more, judged slower, listened longer. Court boasters found themselves gently interrupted by her quiet questions. Markets bustled with new fairness. And gradually, the people of Sheba began emulating their sovereign as nations often do. Anger cooling, worship songs rich with gratitude rather than fear. Years later, wandering teachers spoke of a carpenter's son who healed the blind in muddy villages. One afternoon, addressing crowds baptized in dust and doubt, Jesus pointed to her legacy. The Queen of the South will rise at judgment. Because she traveled from the ends of the earth to hear Solomon, and now something greater than Solomon is here. He never named her, because titles didn't matter. Her journey preached louder than syllables. Seek, and you will be seen. Every listener, fisherman, tax collector, shepherd, heard the hidden invitation. Your desperation is not disqualification, it is a map. Maybe you are not herding camels tonight. Perhaps fluorescent lights hum over your office. Or you're hunched in a bus seat, scrolling this story while rain claws the window. Still, the ache is identical. Does anyone notice the questions beating holes in my chest? If a queen draped in rubies could confess emptiness and pursue an unseen hope, so can the mechanic wiping grease, the student drowning in textbooks, the single parent stitching courage before dawn. Answers are lovely, but presence transforms. So if these words tap the hollow inside, share your journey in the comments. Let strangers become companions. And if this tale kindles something like fire behind your ribs, subscribe to Heavenly Tales HQ, because every narrative we spin is another reminder that you are seen, and the deserts you cross are never the end.